The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was the sort of plain, official envelope that people toss onto kitchen counters and forget, white, with a printing of return address and a barcode down the side. I found it while rinsing a coffee mug, the steam fogging the kitchen window, the October rain telling itself against the glass like a thing that had nowhere else to be. At first I thought it was one of those automated confirmations, car insurance, a magazine subscription, until I saw my name printed in a handwriting I recognized in a way that felt less like recognition and more like a small, precise shock. The signature along the bottom was mine. Trevor Miles, it read, in an address I did not remember giving. Reservation confirmed. Cabin rental, 3 nights. Check-in Friday. I turned the envelope over in my hands, the paper soft where the letterhead's ink had pressed. There was no phone number, only an address, Deep Pines Cabin Rentals, a location somewhere in Oregon's Cascades, a place I'd seen on a map and immediately imagined as postcard perfect evergreen and fog. The confirmation attached a single line of instructions: bring only what you need. The cabin will call you back. A joke, I told myself. A marketing flourish meant to be a little eerie and a little quaint. Nobody included a line like that in a legitimate email or mail. In my work, reporting local features for a small magazine, I had learned to be suspicious of adjectives in copy. But the signature was mine. I had already pictured the way my hand bent when I signed something in a hurry, the T with its extra loop, the S with a slight tilt. I kept the letter in my pocket like a coin. I had not booked, I knew that at once. My credit card statements were precise little histories, they would have told me the truth if I had made the reservation. I checked them. Nothing. The letter was not a mistake forwarded by a friend. It had my address. It had my name. It had a barcode like a promise. On Friday I drove. The highway unfurled like a ribbon, I-5 to 97, and then smaller roads that curled through towns that smelled of wood smoke and fried dough. The rain had stopped. The kind of high, clean sky came after weather passes, leaving light like a damp cloth over everything. My car's temperature readout blinked 46 degrees Fahrenheit, the miles ticked by. I did not feel the nervousness until I passed a sign that read Welcome to OASHWOD, a town of one blinking light and shops with faces turned to the morning, and realized I did not know who, exactly, would give me the keys. Maps on my phone sent me deeper into the trees. The forest rose like black waves. For a long time I drove without seeing another car. My radio played an old song whose chords fit the landscape, something about a road and return. I laughed at myself, out loud, the sound small and sharp in the empty car. It was absurd to feel watched by a piece of paper. I found the cabin because of a mailbox half buried in moss. It stood like an old sentinel at the fork where the road went from crisp asphalt to gravel intended to be respected. There was a small sign nailed to the post, Deep Pines Cabin Rentals. A hand-painted arrow pointed down a narrow lane that disappeared between firs. The lane was a tunnel of trunks. The only sound was my tires on gravel and the occasional wind that spoke like a dry voice. When the lane opened, I expected the world to present itself. A clearing, a porch, a cabin neat in the way cabins are in catalogs. Instead, the structure that unfolded between the trees felt older than catalog, older than the map on my phone. It sat off the road like an animal that had turned its head. It was exactly as the letter described and exactly not at all. The cabin's wood was dark with weather. There was a stone chimney that leaned like a tired man. The windows looked black, like pupils. A swing hung from a beam on the porch, unmoving. There was no car in the driveway. The air smelled of wet pine and something else, lemon oil and dust, the particular perfume of a place preserved like a museum. My keys were in an envelope taped to the front door. My signature, the same small tilt, had been written on a guest book page taped to the counter inside, along with the dates. I lifted the cover of the guest book and my handwriting stared back, immediate and childlike in the way handwriting can be, neat, and trained by responsibility, not yet the small shorthand of casual signatures. The page beneath it contained instructions, firewood stacked on the left, basic essentials in the kitchen, wilderness etiquette, and a note in different handwriting, don't stay 3 nights. I read that note twice, the words printed in an adult's block letters, the stern hand of someone who had put a sign into a place they considered dangerous. The note made me laugh at first because there it was, the quaint superstition I had expected. Don't stay 3 nights. Like don't look into the well, like don't take the midnight train. It felt like a line from a movie. It is a strange thing to realize, half an hour later, that the cabin is a mirror not of the present but of memory. I made coffee and sat by the window watching the trees. The mug warmed my palms. The cabin's floorboard sighed under my soles as if it were speaking in an exhausted voice. Every so often the wind would press its face to the eaves and the swing on the porch would give a soft rattle. From the kitchen window I could see the lane, the mailbox, the way the road disappeared into the trees like a secret. The thing that unsettled me at first was tiny, a framed photograph on the mantel of a small, square house that looked like it had been stripped of time. It was a house I had seen in half-remembered dreams, its porch, the chipped railing, the way a maple tree stood guard in the front yard. I knew that house. I had no business knowing it. I had never lived anywhere but the apartment in Portland, the cramped space with a radiator that clanged and a landlord who smelled of mint. And yet the photograph sat there, black and white, the house angled in the image like a threat. My childhood home was not in Oregon. It had been a fragment in my memory, pried loose by years of moving, a place I could almost reconstruct if I pressed hard enough, the scuffed linoleum in the kitchen, the metal mailbox that stuck when it rained, the wallpaper with tiny boats. I had taken the picture down once when I found it in a box of old things at my mother's house, a keepsake, she'd said, from a family who moved and forgot to bring back a picture. I did not remember bringing that photograph here. There were other signs. A child's toy, a wooden soldier, sat on a shelf, its paint worn. A mug with a small chip on the rim matched the one I kept in my cabinet back in Portland. A nightstand drawer had a folded-up baseball card with my name penciled on the back in a kid's scribble, Trevor. The handwriting was not the adult signature from the guest book. It crooked in that awkward way that promises a future. I started to feel a groove of heat behind my sternum. The house felt like a memory someone had sculpted. The walls wrapped me. I told myself it was likely the previous guests, perhaps owners who liked collecting old things, a place staged to feel lived in for reasons of charm. I told myself I was a reporter, that I should look for the sensible explanation, a marketing idea, a local artisan's touch, the cabin's owner who liked nostalgia like other people like jazz. I slept badly. An old radio in the corner turned itself on at odd hours, static fusing into the thinner shape of tunes I could almost recall from childhood, a TV theme, a jingle. A clock chimed an hour when it was not time. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of someone quietly rearranging the dishes. I lay too still to breathe, trying to tell whether the motion was coming from me, my own restless turning, or from the walls. At dawn I went outside. Fog pooled like milk between the trunks. The porch swing moved slowly, as if someone had just left it. The impression of footprints in the yard led to the back, then disappeared. There was a smell of wood smoke like a long ago winter. I walked around to the side of the cabin where the land sloped and found a narrow cellar door half buried under leaves. The lock had been recently oiled. The hinge read like new. I ran my fingers along the cold metal. Nothing about the cellar made sense. It was sealed in a way someone would want to keep a place closed. I spent the day wandering like a person in a play who had misplaced their lines. I checked my phone. There was no signal, only a stubborn little bar that stayed one step above nothing. The guest book contained entries from other renters, people praising the view, a honeymoon trip, a tucked-away hideaway for a writer who found himself at the liquor cabinet and kept the key in the wrong shoebox. One page contained a brief, neat scrawl, "This place remembered me." The sentence made the hair on my arms rise. At noon I drove into Ashwood, the nearest town, because the idea of people felt safer than the idea of a house that knew me. The coffee shop was a low building with a bell that rang when the door opened. The barista, a woman with a tattoo of a compass, recognized the name on my cup as one the locals used for delivery, The Cabin. When I asked about the cabin, she smiled like someone indulging an eccentric neighbor. "Oh, deep pines," she said. "Don't worry about them. People come back different, that's all. They say the cabin calls them. Folks round here, well, we tell them to watch their hearts." She laughed in a way that suggested the story had been told many times. "You're joking," I said. She tilted her head. "Do you have family in town?" she asked. That question came unbidden. I said no. The truth, or the truth that fits, was that my family had dispersed and learned to keep distance like a complicated instrument. My mother lived 2 hours away, in a town where the rain tasted sharper. We spoke on holidays. We were not, by any accurate metric, a family so much as a set of people who once shared an address. "No family," I said, and she looked at me for a moment like someone suspending judgment. "Then be careful," she said. "Cabin's fine if you don't mind the past." She handed me a coffee with a smile and a paper cup sleeve stamped deep with the town's name. Back at the cabin the shadows were longer. The house seemed to inhale with the dusk, and when night fell it felt as if the place turned its attention toward me in a way that was not quite kind. I started to unpack, setting a bag of clothes on the bed, a camera on the dresser. I told myself stories for reassurance, that I would make a neat piece about cabins and solitude, that the letter had been a fluke, a prank. The rational mind makes scaffolding to carry us across unexplainable things. That evening, while the rain started its circular business against the windows, I found the journal. I had not seen it on the counter earlier. It lay beneath a stack of local postcards, images of the Cascade Ridgeline, a waterfall cut with white teeth, a postcard printed with a photograph of a house that looked, by some coincidence that was too precise to be comfortable, exactly like the photograph on my mantel. The journal's cover was worn, its edges softened. Whoever kept it had been diligent with their pen, because the first entry I read contained my name. It read, in a hand I could not identify at first, "Day 1. Trevor arrived. The wind is making the chimney moan." The writer's tone was matter-of-fact, as if circling down a ladder well worn by habit. The second line claimed the date, but the year was wrong, an older year, the year I was 6. The handwriting changed in the next entry, it became smaller, more urgent. It described things no one should be able to know without being there, a crack in the kitchen floor that hummed in the rain, a lullaby hummed by someone not in the house. My palms felt cold. I flipped the journal pages and saw snippets, the writer's notes about the wallpaper pattern, a child's laugh in the garden, then a half-paragraph that looked like a list of events predicted, a knock at night, the sound of keys, a person called Trevor who will not sleep, who will open the basement door. I slammed the journal closed. The sound echoed like a gunshot in a theater. For some minutes I stood there with the journal in my hands and tried to invent reason like a sculptor invents form out of wire. Maybe the journal belonged to the owner, a person who liked detail and chronicling. Maybe someone had come to the cabin before me and left behind an accretion of things. That line, Trevor arrived, had to be coincidence. Someone could have shared my name. It happened. People share names every day. But coincidences have momentum. They do not always stand alone. I made dinner and ate at the kitchen table. The rain whispered against the roof in a pattern that sounded like phrases if I let my mind shape it. Later, I washed the dishes and stacked them. The sink gurgled. I moved to turn off the light and froze because a voice, soft, childlike, impossibly familiar, whispered outside the window. Trevor? It was not a whisper in the wind. It was clear, deliberate, as if someone had crossed the yard and said my name like a simple offering. My hands left the metal of the faucet and hung there like a question mark. The yard was empty. The swing on the porch moved in a line that was slow and indifferent. I told myself to go outside. I told myself to find the source. I told myself 1,000 things that were simple bravado. The porch light glowed like a small halo. I stepped toward the door, each board complaining underfoot, and the light on the mantel flickered. For a second the room was other than where I stood. It was the living room at 6 years old, the wallpaper faintly boat-shaped, the game board on the coffee table. Memory is a cheat, and houses are accomplices. What called me that night, the voice, if it was a voice, could have been the wind. It could have been the way the house read my name on my driver's license and felt obliged to say it aloud. It could have been an animal. All these explanations served like life preservers. I left the porch light on and slept with the journal under my pillow. When I woke, the chair by the window had been turned to face the room. I have never been a man who believes easily in omens, or in the idea that places hold agency. I had written about haunted hotels and clumsy tragedies and the way people make stories to hold themselves together. But by the time the first night ended, I could not entirely tell whether the house remembered me because I had been there before, or whether I remembered the house because it had taught me. Outside, the trees pressed close. The letter in my jacket pocket felt heavier than paper. Somewhere down the lane, a fox yipped. I drew the curtains shut like drawing a curtain over a stage, and for the first time since the letter arrived I felt something like dread settle over me with a gravity that was not theatrical. It was honest and patient and waiting for me to make a decision. The rules written on that scrap of paper, "Don't stay 3 nights," had not been merely quaint decoration. They were a margin note, a caution written by someone who knew the grammar of the place. I did not know the grammar yet. I only knew that something about the cabin had taken my signature and arranged it perfectly in a frame I had no recollection of making. I only knew that the world outside my city had the patience to wait and to draw me back, and I only knew that the photograph on the mantel watched me like a memory that had found its voice. In the morning I would open the basement door. I told myself that as if a plan could form a fence around the unknown. I went to bed feeling watched not by a person, but by time itself, and the sound that convinced me I was not alone was not a voice but the house itself settling in for the night, as if it were comfortable and glad I had come. Something, or someone, in that house had started an accounting, and my name was the first entry. The next morning I tried, with deliberate smallness, to act like someone whose life still had a majority of sensible choices. I boiled water for coffee, sat at the table, and read the journal again with a kind of stubborn, clinical curiosity. Whoever had written it, and why someone had known to leave it where I would find it, had a cadence to their notes that made my teeth feel tight. Day 2, he will not leave today. Day 2, he brings a camera. He talks into it like a man who keeps his loneliness with him. Lines like that looped across the page as if the writer were tracing the path of a predestined conversation. Some entries were so plain they had the weight of inevitability. The cellar door will twitch like a throat. When I read those words, my stomach reacted the way it does to a memory of shame, a sudden coldness followed by heat. I tried to find the edges of authorship, ink pressure, pen tilt, a smudge that might reveal whether the author was left or right-handed. There were no clues I trusted. Outside, the trees arranged themselves like an audience who had come to see how I would perform. The day was blank and cold, the sun pressed through in a thin sheet. I walked the perimeter of the clearing with the camera slung over my shoulder like a talisman and found, nudged beneath a pile of last fall's leaves, a child's shoe. It was scuffed, the leather crazed, the laces knotted into a loop that looked like someone had tied it in a hurry. The shoe reminded me, absurdly, of the little wooden soldier on the shelf, like props collected from different plays. That afternoon I heard talking and did what I had been taught not to do with stories of houses and whispers. I opened the door into the night and peered out, a man trying to gather evidence for his sanity. A neighbor, a bearded man in a flannel jacket who introduced himself as Hank, had wandered down the lane with a thermos and a curious gait. He looked exactly like the kind of man who could have lived in a town like Ashwood forever, sun-leathered face, hands like tools, eyes that had the literate patience of people who had read the same book to themselves for decades. "Trevor," he said by way of greeting. His voice had the creak of an old gate. "You hear about the 3 nights?" "You told the barista," I said. He shifted his weight. "And she told me. Folks round here don't like to make a show of it. But you're in deep, son." He smiled in a way that made the grin look like it had been sewn on. "You staying long?" 3 nights, I said automatically, the number feeling like a ritual word. I had not planned to, I realized. I could leave. I could drive my car out and never look back. But the letter in my jacket pocket had weight, so did the way my curiosity felt like a debt. Hank's face softened a little. "You don't have to. Most come back different, you know. Not in a bad way if you got your bearings, but," he gestured with a hand that smelled faintly of coffee and wood. "It's a place that keeps accounts. It likes to finish ledgers." "What does that mean?" I asked. He shrugged and looked past me into the trees like someone who watched seasons like auctions. "It remembers what people were. It remembers what they could have been." "Does it?" I began, then stopped. "How do you ask a man whether a house will unmake you? How do you reduce a curiosity that had been brewing in your gut to a small, reasonable question?" "It'll show you things that fit," Hank continued. "Pictures. Sounds. Old voices. Might be kinder than the truth. Might be cruel. Depends on what you gave it." He leaned in. "Don't stay 3 nights." The words landed between us like a cautionary coin. I wanted to ask what happened to the people who stayed longer. I wanted to pour coffee into him and demand stories like a child. But Hank finished his thermos and said he had to be back before dusk for supper. He tipped his thermos, a small, private salute, and walked off as if the whole conversation had been merely a courtesy. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen with the journal in my hands. The handwriting inside had grown more agitated in the later pages I had not read the night before. It described small, uncanny details, the way a faucet squeaked like a cry, the sound of footsteps above a ceiling when there was no one upstairs. The final entry I read that afternoon said, in a voice that had run its course of patience, "If he opens the cellar, he should not go down." I carried that sentence around in my head like a stone. Warnings have weight, they accumulate like loose pebbles until they become an obstacle in a path. Sleep again was thin, populated by children's laughter that belonged to a house I had never lived in and the rustle of someone turning a page. The strange thing about the cabin was not only that it remembered pieces of my life, it seemed determined to place them where they would be discovered slowly, like a staged unmasking. I woke repeatedly to small events that might have been coincidence. A radio turning on at 3 in the morning with the quiet, mournful voice of a man singing a lullaby I could nearly place. The swing on the porch rocking with a motion that suggested some recent absence. On the second night the scratches began. They started as small things, a faint tapping within the wall near the kitchen, like a finger tracing the grain of the wood. At first I convinced myself it was mice, or the house settling, or the pipes. The more honest explanation, the one that began to eat at my sense of rationality, was that the house itself had started to write. The tapping arranged itself in patterns I could almost read if I let myself. Sometimes it would stop when I spoke the word aloud, sometimes it would respond with a single, measured tap. I set up the camera in the living room as if evidence could be summoned like an amulet. I pointed it at the mantel and let it run through the night. When I checked the footage the next morning, the screen showed the room breathing in a slow cadence. The clock on the wall chimed when it was not time. At one point, the camera picked up the minutest movement. The photograph on the mantel trembled as if a ghost of wind had passed through the room. I fast-forwarded and saw something small and impossible. For a moment, reflected in the glass of the framed photograph, the little square of the old house slid like a picture inside a picture, and for a second the porch in the photo looked wet, and a shadow, the shape of a small boy, stood at the railing and turned its head directly toward the camera. My hand went cold. I replayed the clip a dozen times. Each time the shadow appeared I felt a pressure in my chest like someone was reading my name off a long list. The video became not evidence but incantation. The house was doing something to the world that could be caught on film. The possibility that I was hallucinating shrank in the light of pixels. The journal's predictions continued. They were not always linear, sometimes they read like a script meant to coax events into being. Day 3, he will see a boy at the window. Day 3, he will not sleep. Day 3, he will find his handwriting like something borrowed from the future. At noon, I drove back into Ashwood because denial requires company. I needed to put the bizarre things I was experiencing into words I could weigh against other people. The town seemed quieter than before, as if my questions had made a sound that the locals preferred not to amplify. The barista gave me a look like a woman who feared that answering would be an obligation. "More visitors?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "But not many leave with what they came with." She fell silent for a long moment, then said, "There was a family, years back. Moved in for a while. Took pictures. Folks around here didn't like the way their eyes looked in the photographs, too bright, like a camera had peered through a glass screen. They left. came back different. Different how? I asked. She lowered her voice. They remembered other people's names. They called strangers by names that belonged to dead neighbors. One man thought he was a different age. He started to write like a kid. It's like the cabin stitches what it thinks you are. She added with a soft shrug, we fix what we can. We don't ask for much. When I asked where these people had gone, whether they had moved on, or whether the world had been unkind to them, she didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled a small brochure from under the counter and slid it to me. It was a pamphlet about local history with a black and white photograph of the land where Deep Pines sat now. The caption read, prior to 1958, this valley was the site of the Ashwood Orphanage, later demolished after a fire. A little line like that in a brochure is a kind of stone thrown into a still pond. The ripples reach me slowly. That night the house's small duplicities escalated. The journal now contained entries that were not predictions so much as invitations. Day 4, he will find the tape. Day 4, he will ask why. When the tapping turned into steady scratching along the ceiling above the bedroom, I went upstairs and felt, absurdly, like a child spying on a parent, the floor for hollows that might conceal a hidden radio. There was nothing, only the familiar scuffs and the long, polite history of a house being used. Yet the scratches were there, persistent, as if something sought to write its way through plaster. Dreams at night began to pull like tide. The house insisted on showing me scenes I did not own. I walked through my childhood house at 6 years old in a dream that edged into waking like a plate sliding across ice. The wallpaper had tiny boats. A woman hummed in the kitchen, a tune I could not place, and the voice that hummed seemed intent on finishing a sentence that had been left incomplete for decades. When I woke, I had a scrap of paper in my hand I did not remember taking. On it someone had written a single line in small print, "You are almost there." It is trivial and simultaneously a calamity how easily a person can be made complicit in their own demise. I wanted to run. I wanted to drive 20 miles until the trees unhooked and the sky widened into indifferent highway. Yet something that had started as curiosity was settling into a slow, stubborn gravity. The cabin had begun to map me, to lay out the features of my life like being a cartographer of an old shore. It left breadcrumbs that led not outward but inward. On the 4th day, the one the journal circled like a comet, I found the VHS tape. I had gone searching because the scratching above the bedroom had changed pitch and because my mouth tasted of recording tape and the small iron tang of fear. In a drawer beneath the TV I found an old box labeled video logs, the kind used by motels and small businesses before the world chose digital resolutions. Inside were cassettes with dates, some of them decades old, some of them recent, and beside them a single, unmarked tape with my name on it in faded pencil, Trevor, age 6. I have never liked the idea of being the central figure in a story I cannot control. I set the tape on the coffee table with a care that was almost reverent. The VCR, an old, heavy thing with buttons like teeth, accepted the cassette with a mechanical sigh. The television flickered and took in the signal like an animal. The image that came through at first was grainy, the amber of old film. Then the picture focused. A small boy stood at the edge of a room lit with the honeyed lamplight of a house I had never occupied. He had my hairline, the small crookedness of my left eyebrow, things I had never believed a stranger could replicate with such painful accuracy. The boy, me, walked to a window and looked out. The camera, stationary, captured him from a distance the way you capture a subject through a keyhole. He turned his head and looked toward the camera with the same stubborn curiosity I had watched in myself in a mirror. His mouth opened. He said a single word, and because of how sound folds into memory like paper folded between pages, I felt my throat open and betray me with a sound that was not mine. "Trevor," the child said. I realized I had been holding my breath. My chest felt hollowed by the possibility of being taught to be someone else's story. The tape continued. The boy stepped outside in bare feet and walked along a porch that could have been the one in the photograph on the mantel. He hesitated, placed his hand on the railing, and turned, not toward the camera but toward some point I could not see. The film cut and then showed the boy opening a door that should not have existed in the present, a rough wood door with a lock that did not match the era. The tape showed a hand go into the dark, then the camera stuttered. The image glitched like a heart skipping. The audio dropped into a low hum and then came back, distorted, like someone speaking through a long pipe. When the picture returned, the boy, my boy, was older, or perhaps a different version of him. The frame showed a corridor that could not be right, lined with doors that leaked light like teeth. He walked down the corridor as if returning to a home he had lived in for years. When the tape ended, the room felt as if it had been drained. The thought of the cellar door, the one I had noticed half buried under leaves, pressed on my mind like a finger. The journal had warned me. Hank had warned me. The barista, taciturn and world-aware, had hinted. The tape had closed an idea into my head like a nail. I sat on the living room floor with the tape player between my knees and felt bewildered by the normality of the house around me. The mantel clock ticked. The photograph watched. For the first time there was an edge to my fear that cut with logic. Someone had recorded me as a child in a house that predated my memory. Someone had known to label me. Outside, the pines breathed. The cabin's windows were black, like eyes. When I rose to my feet, there was a certainty I could not claim. The cellar door would open again. The house had, in a slow and patient way, made a space for me to find what it wanted me to see. I found myself in the kitchen with the journal in my hands, flipping until the paper felt warm under my thumb. The entries now read like a conversation not with the past but with the future. Day 5, he is ready. Day 5, he will not be the same. A sound like a soft throat cleared came from below the floorboards. The cellar lock, which had seemed recently oiled, creaked. For a moment I thought I was the only person left on Earth, and that Earth had shifted to show me a secret. The lock turned. I stood there like a man at the edge of a stage who had been given his cue. The air that rose from the cellar was not simply cool, it smelled of old paper and river silt and the particular, disorienting scent of rooms where time had condensed and pooled. When I pushed the ladder of the cellar door open, a linen-drawn draft lifted the hair at the back of my neck. A light blurred the steps, not the dead yellow of a bulb, but a light that might have been memory itself, filtered through years like old film. The stairs went down into a dark that felt thick, as if it clung to the hems of your clothes. The house inhaled and, in that intake, closed not on my breath but on what I had thought to be steady and true. The cellar door shut on a sound like a box falling. For a moment I considered slamming it and running. For a moment I considered the shame of fleeing before I had satisfied the smallest curiosity. Curiosity, it turns out, is a lever that can pry open most doors. I turned on the small flashlight I had found in a kitchen drawer, fixed it like a surgeon fixing a scalpel, and began to walk down. The steps were colder than they had any right to be. The light from my flashlight skittered across jars on shelves and then rested on a circle of objects placed like offerings, a small tin, a child's paper boat, a photograph folded until the edges were soft. The photograph had been creased into the shape of a pocket. When I unfolded it, the image inside made the air leave my mouth in a sudden, sharp breath. It was a picture of me standing in the doorway of the cabin, not today, but some other afternoon tinted with an old summer. The boy in the photo had the same hairline and the same crooked eyebrow, but the backdrop had a framed picture on the wall with a house. The caption on the back, in a hand I had come to know like a tongue in my cheek, read, "Trevor, age 6. Returned." Something in the cellar shifted then, not the house so much as a sense that I had crossed a line where my life and the cabin's ledger had become keyed to one another. Upstairs the house resumed its calm breathing. Down here, in the dim stacked air, the journal on the steps had a new page folded into it. I opened it. Day 6, you opened the door. Day 6, the house takes what it needs. Day 6, it is patient. It is not cruel. It is a machine for memory. The words did not comfort. They did not console. They simply told me what I had already begun to suspect. If I went down further, the house would show me things to make me understand why I had been called back. And whether understanding would be a mercy or a sentence I could not say. In the small breakfast nook upstairs, the clock chimed. Outside, the trees sealed themselves around the clearing. I stood with the flashlight like an accusation and felt the impossible weight of being a person whose name had become an entry in someone else's ledger. The cellar door, the one that had been oiled, the one that had not been meant to be opened, creaked shut behind me. I did not know then whether closing it would lock me in or whether it would be opening the final page of a book I had never chosen to read. What I knew was a simpler, more immediate thing. When things begin to write you into the world, the only choices left are what to do with the story once it's been printed in your hands. I took one step down into the dark. The light pinched my pupils. The house hummed like a throat, and somewhere above me someone, or something, tapped once as if to say, "You are exactly where you should be." The stairs swallowed sound as I descended, each step covered in a thin powder of dust that lifted and settled like breath. It felt as though the air thickened the deeper I went, its chill no longer the natural cold of basements but the temperature of old memory. My flashlight trembled. I told myself it was my hand, but the beam danced as if things moved just outside its reach. Halfway down, the scratching stopped. That was somehow worse. The silence lay over everything like fine ash. When I reached the bottom, the last stair dipped under my weight, and the wood gave a sound like a restrained sigh. The basement was larger than the footprint of the cabin should allow. The walls disappeared into dark, and the old, grainy light I'd noticed earlier, thin and amber, seemed to come from no fixture at all. It glowed like recollection. Something hung in the center of the room. A mirror. Tall, framed in a wooden border that looked older than the cabin, older even than Ashwood itself. As I approached it, the glass wavered, not from dust, not from age, but with the fluid motion of something alive. Reflections bent. The room inside the mirror leaned toward me like an eager listener. In that shifting glass, I saw a child sitting on the floor. A boy with my face. Bare feet. Knees drawn up. Head tilted in that painfully familiar way I had when I was thinking too hard. He couldn't have been more than 6. The same age as the boy in the tapes. My mouth dry. "Who are you?" The boy lifted his head. His mouth moved, but the sound came not from the mirror but from behind me, as if threaded through the basement walls. Trevor, he said, and my name echoed in the room like a command. You came back. My flashlight flickered. When it came back on, the boy was standing. He pressed his small palm against the mirror, and when he did, the glass bowed forward, bulging like water. Ripples moved across it. The boy's handprint deepened until I thought it might push through. I stepped back. Wood creaked somewhere behind me. The cabin moved. I didn't turn around. Every instinct insisted that turning meant acknowledging something waiting in the dark. Why are you here? I asked, voice softer than I intended. The boy smiled. I stayed too long. His reflection fragmented into multiple versions, him at 6, then 7, then me at 12, then a teenager, then a man twisted by angles that did not belong to human bones. The images flickered too fast for breath. A parade of versions of myself I had never lived. Then the mirror stilled. And the basement door above creaked open with an awful, slow courtesy. Footsteps came down the stairs. Measured. Careful. Familiar. I finally turned, not because I was brave, but because the sound demanded obedience. It was me. Or it was something wearing me. A perfect copy, from the angle of the jaw to the worn denim jacket I had put on that morning. Only the eyes were wrong, too bright, too still, like someone who had memorized being human but had not yet learned to mimic thought. Don't be afraid, the copy said in my voice. I've been waiting. My throat closed. Copies do not belong outside mirrors. Yet this one stood with a posture I recognized from photographs, that slight lean as if listening to something just behind. You think you chose to come here, the copy said. But the cabin called you because you owe it a story. I don't owe. You owe it your return. Behind me, the mirror pulsed. The child version of me stepped toward the glass again, and this time his hand pushed through, skin shimmering like a reflection brought into the world. The air bent around him. I don't understand, I whispered. The copy smiled. You will. Everyone who leaves this place leaves twice. What does that mean? It means, it said, stepping closer, one version stays. One version goes. The cabin keeps what it needs. My back hit the mirror frame. The wood pulsed like a heartbeat. The boy's hand brushed mine, cold, faint, unreal. I jerked away, but the copy lunged forward swiftly, its movement too clean, too rehearsed. Its fingers wrapped around my wrist. It was strong. Not human strong. A different, deliberate kind, as if the cabin had filled the copy with decades of practice. You've spent your life forgetting, it whispered. But the cabin remembers. And now you do too. Memories crashed into me, not real ones, not mine, but imitations overlaid onto my mind. Walking these basement stairs as a child. Laughing with someone unseen. Being told stories by voices that sounded like adults but came from the walls. Returning again and again, year after year, even though the cabin had not existed then. The cabin wasn't preserving memory. It was manufacturing it. The boy pulled harder, and the surface of the mirror rippled again, growing soft like a membrane wanting to swallow. Let go, the copy said gently. It won't hurt. I yanked my arm with all the strength fear gives a person and drove my shoulder into the copy, shoving it backward. It stumbled, not much, but enough. Its face changed for the first time, surprise cracking its perfect mimicry. I sprinted up the stairs. The cabin groaned, an angry sound, ancient wood bending with a voice that felt almost like a command. Trevor. 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 Multiple voices layered, young and old, whispered and cried and shouted, from the basement, from the kitchen walls, from the rafters. I reached the door. It didn't budge. Behind me, footsteps climbed the stairs with slow, confident rhythm. The copy. My flashlight flickered out. Darkness swallowed everything except the soft glow rising from below, like memory following me. I threw myself against the door again. Wood cracked. The lock strained. The voice behind me said calmly, "You leave now. You won't come back. The cabin needs someone." "I'm not staying," I rasped. "You don't choose." Hands brushed my back. I rammed the door with my shoulder. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th, the wood burst open. Cold morning air sliced across my face, and I stumbled out onto the porch, raining needles of light through the trees. The swing creaked. The clearing dipped into a silence that felt as hollow as breath held underwater. Behind me, the cabin's interior light dimmed. I didn't look back. I ran. Down the lane. Past the mailbox. Onto the gravel road. Toward my car. Toward anything that was not the house that had started calling my name before I learned how to write it. I drove until the trees thinned and the world felt breathable. Miles passed in a blur. At some point, the sun broke through clouds and stretched itself across the hood of my car like a guarantee. I didn't stop until Ashwood was a vanished memory behind me. When I finally pulled over at a gas station 30 miles away, my hands shook so hard I spilled half the water bottle trying to drink. The reflection in the car window steadied me. Brown hair. Tired eyes. No uncanny brightness. Normal. Human. Me. I leaned closer to be sure. And then the reflection blinked. 1 beat too late. Not my blink. Its own. And it smiled. A smile that wasn't mine. Inside the car, my real face stayed frozen. Outside, the reflection lifted a hand. And tapped the glass. Once. Like a promise. Like a whisper. Like the cabin saying, "You left. But I kept your place. And sooner or later, you will return." Have a nice day. Thank you for watching.